The air on August 19, 1814, is not the air of battle. It is a suffocating, wet blanket of heat draped over the banks of the Patuxent River in Maryland. The sun, a merciless copper disk, beats down on the thick, red wool coatees of thousands of British soldiers. They are a long way from home. They are 4,500 effectives, combat-ready, professional, and exhausted. This is not the green, rain-swept countryside of the Peninsular War, where many of these men earned their reputation. This is the Chesapeake, and the heat is an enemy all its own. They have just landed at the small port of Benedict. Their transports and warships a forest of masts on the river behind them, a visible projection of the Royal Navy's absolute, unchallenged dominance of this American bay. Their commander, Major General Robert Ross, an Irish-born officer forged in Wellington's armies, looks inland. There are no supply lines, no depots, no clear line of retreat save for the one back to the ships. 50 miles of hostile territory lie between his small army and its objective. Not a fortress, not an enemy army. The objective is an idea. It is the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C. This is not a war of conquest. It is a raid. It is a punitive expedition, a mission of vengeance. It is, by any military definition, an audacious gamble. This entire operation, the Chesapeake Campaign, exists for one reason: retaliation. A year earlier, in 1813, American forces had crossed the border into Upper Canada and captured its capital, York, the city known today as Toronto. In an act of profound humiliation, the Americans had looted and burned its public buildings, including its parliament. The British Empire, locked in a generation-spanning death struggle with Napoleonic France, had paid the offence little mind at the time. But now, Napoleon is in exile. The Peninsular War is over, and the veterans of that war, the finest infantry in the world, are here. The order has come down to destroy and lay waste to American towns and districts in explicit retribution. At Ross's side is the true firebrand of the operation, Rear Admiral George Cockburn. Where Ross is the consummate professional, Cockburn is the naval enforcer, a man who has come to despise his American opponents. He has spent months raiding the Chesapeake, and he relishes the task ahead. It is he who will accompany Ross on the march, he who will urge the soldiers forward, and he who will, with a sailor's practicality, point out which buildings will burn the best. This is a combined arms operation in its truest sense. The Royal Navy has delivered the striking force, and now the army will deliver the blow. The soldiers, wiping sweat from their brows, check their Brown Bess muskets. They belong to regiments whose names are already legends. The 4th, the King's Own. The 21st, Royal North British Fusiliers. The 44th, East Essex. And leading the way, the fast-moving 85th Light Infantry, the Bucks Volunteers. They are a hardened professional force, about to march deep into a nation of citizen militia. They do not know what awaits them, but they have absolute faith in their officers, their discipline, and their bayonets. The march begins. While the British professionals march, the American capital is a city consumed by rumour, panic, and political incompetence. There is no plan, there is only reaction. The man tasked with the defence of Washington is Major General William H. Winder. He is not a seasoned commander. He is a political appointee, a man who owes his rank to his connections rather than his experience. In the face of a genuine crisis, he is paralysed by indecision. As Ross's 4,500 men move inland, Winder frantically scours the countryside, issuing contradictory orders, trying to guess the enemy's intentions. Is the target Washington? Or is it the more strategically valuable port of Baltimore? Or perhaps the naval yards at Annapolis? He spreads his forces thin, trying to cover everything, and in doing so, defends nothing. His army is a desperate, last-minute collection of men. On paper it looks respectable, approximately 7,000 troops. But this number is a dangerous illusion. The vast majority, some 6,000 men, are raw militia from the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia. They are farmers, shopkeepers, and clerks, men who have perhaps drilled on the village green, but have never faced a professional soldier in their lives. They carry muskets they barely know how to use and possess a discipline that will evaporate with the first volley. The only hardcore of this American force numbers less than 1,000, about 400 U.S. Army regulars, and crucially, 500 U.S. Navy flotillamen and U.S. Marines under the command of a genuine hero, Commodore Joshua Barney. Barney's men are sailors and Marines, tough, disciplined, and spoiling for a fight. They have been forced to scuttle their own gunboat flotilla on the Patuxent to prevent its capture by Admiral Cockburn's fleet, and they have dragged their 5 heavy naval cannons, 12 and 18-pounders, all the way to the battlefield. They are sailors without a ship, and they are furious. On August 24, 1814, the British finally find their path. They have marched for 5 days, not at night as planned, but often in the debilitating daytime heat. Men drop from sunstroke, their tongues swelling in the 100-degree humidity. But they press on. Winder, finally realizing the target is Washington, makes his stand at the town of Bladensburg, just a few miles northeast of the capital. It is the only logical place to cross the eastern branch of the Potomac, now called the Anacostia River. Here, Winder lays out his defense. He attempts a classic defense in depth, placing his troops in 3 lines. It is a tactic sound in theory, but disastrous in execution. The lines are placed too far apart to support one another. The flanks are left exposed, in the air. The men are nervous. Even President James Madison himself, Commander-in-Chief, rides out to the battlefield to observe. A shocking and dangerous act for a sitting president. Seeing the chaos, he is quickly persuaded to retire to safety. Around 1 p.m., the British vanguard, the 85th Light Infantry, arrives at Bladensburg. They are exhausted, filthy, and dehydrated, but they are professionals. They see the American lines arrayed on the hills across the river. They immediately find a shallow ford. Without hesitation, the 85th splashes across the water. The first line of American militia, as per their training, fires a single, ragged volley. The British, as per their training, do not stop. They keep coming, their bayonets glistening. The militia fire a second volley, and then their courage shatters. The concept of standing, reloading, and firing while a line of red-coated veterans charges at them with cold steel is more than they can bear. They break. They drop their muskets, and they run. The entire first line dissolves, fleeing back through the second line, sowing panic and confusion. The second line, seeing the first flee, follows suit. It is a rout. It is a total collapse of command and morale. The British regulars, sensing the panic, press their advantage. The battle, such as it is, becomes a foot race. The American militia stream back towards Washington, their officers powerless to stop them. The event will forever be known by its humiliating nickname, the Bladensburg Races. The Bladensburg Races are in full flood. Thousands of American militiamen are streaming west, a disorganized mob clogging the road back to Washington. But the battle is not over. As the victorious British 85th and 44th regiments reform their lines and advance over the ground abandoned by the first 2 American lines, they crest a ridge and stop. Before them is a third and final line of defense. This is not a line of trembling farmers. This is a line of 500 sailors and Marines, standing grimly beside 5 heavy naval cannons. This is Commodore Joshua Barney's flotillamen. These are men without a fleet, but they have brought their broadside to the battlefield. Their 12-pounder and 18-pounder guns are far heavier than any standard field artillery, and they are manned by gunners who know how to use them with lethal speed. Barney, a naval hero of the Revolution, has positioned his men to command the main road. He is the only competent American commander on the field, and his line is the only professional unit left. As the Redcoats advance, Barney gives the order. The world explodes. The 5 cannons unleash a devastating storm of grapeshot and canister. The British, marching in formation, are torn apart. The road is swept clean by a hail of iron. This is not a musket volley. It is a naval broadside delivered on land, and it stops the elite British infantry cold. General Ross is stunned by the ferocity of this resistance. The men who had just scattered 6,000 militia are now pinned down by 500 sailors. He orders his men to take cover and brings up his own secret weapon, the Congreve rockets. These are not the precise artillery of a later age. They are 12 and 32-pound solid-fuel rockets, launched from simple frames. Their primary purpose is psychological. With a terrifying high-pitched scream and a whoosh that trails fire and smoke, they arc over the battlefield. This is the sound that had helped shatter the militia's nerve. But Barney's men are not militia. They are sailors, accustomed to the thunder of cannon and the crash of falling masts. The rockets, wildly inaccurate, scream over their heads. They flinch, but they do not break. They reload their cannons. Ross realizes this position must be taken by cold steel. He orders his best regiments, the 4th and 21st, to fix bayonets. This is what the Peninsular War veterans do best. But a frontal assault into the teeth of those guns is suicide. The 85th is sent to skirmish, to use the terrain, to move through the woods and get around Barney's flanks. The main force lines up for the charge. The British regulars advance, taking terrible losses from the canister shot. They reform and charge again. Barney's sailors fight like men possessed. They fire their cannons until the British are too close. Then they abandon the guns and meet the bayonet charge with naval cutlasses and pikes. The fighting is brutal, hand to hand, a desperate melee on the dusty road, but it cannot last. The 85th Light Infantry, having successfully navigated the terrain, now appears on the American flank. Barney's men, already engaged frontally, are now hit from the side. The line, surrounded, finally collapses. Commodore Barney himself, fighting alongside his men, is severely wounded by a musket ball and captured. The last organized American resistance between the British Army and the American capital is broken. When General Ross is brought to the wounded Commodore, he is moved by his enemy's courage. In a gesture of profound respect for a fellow professional, Ross immediately paroles Barney, refusing to take the brave sailor prisoner. With Barney defeated, the road to Washington, D.C. lies open and undefended. The sun is beginning to set. The British, victorious but weary, reform their columns. Their objective is now in sight. The Battle of Bladensburg is over. The road to Washington is clear, littered with the discarded muskets, packs, and canteens of a routed army. Major General Robert Ross reforms his exhausted columns. His men have marched 50 miles in 5 days of suffocating August heat and have just fought a sharp, brutal engagement. They are dehydrated, soaked in sweat and grime, and utterly spent. Yet, a profound sense of victory hangs in the air. They have done what was thought impossible. A mere 4,500 effectives have scattered an army of 7,000 and now stand at the gates of the enemy's capital. The sun is low in the sky, casting long, ominous shadows. The city before them is silent, as the British vanguard, led by Ross and the ever-eager Rear Admiral Cockburn, cautiously enters Washington, D.C. around 8 p.m. They are met not with barricades and cannon, but with an eerie, profound emptiness. The government has utterly disintegrated. President James Madison, having witnessed the Bladensburg races firsthand, is a refugee, fleeing into the Virginia countryside. His government has scattered. The city has been abandoned to the conquerors. This is not the defiant, defended capital they had expected. It is a ghost town, awaiting its sentence. Just moments before their arrival, the president's mansion, not yet known as the White House, had been a scene of frantic, last-minute panic. First, Lady Dolly Madison had waited, defiant, for her husband's return. She had ordered a grand dinner prepared for 40 guests, a gesture of confidence intended to bolster the morale of the president's cabinet and military commanders. The table was set with silver and china, the wine was cooling, and the food was ready to be served. But as the day wore on, confidence gave way to terror. Messengers arrived, breathless, with news of the rout. The British were coming. Mrs. Madison was urged to flee, but she refused to leave one symbolic item behind. With the sound of the rout growing closer, She famously directed the staff to save the full-length portrait of George Washington, the nation's founder. Fearing the frame was too securely bolted to the wall to be removed in time, she ordered it to be broken, the canvas cut from its stretcher. This was not an act of preserving art. It was an act of saving a national icon from desecration by the enemy. With the precious canvas finally secured, Dolly Madison fled the mansion, escaping just minutes before the British vanguard clattered down Pennsylvania Avenue. When General Ross and Admiral Cockburn enter the president's mansion, they are met with a scene of surreal domesticity. They walk into the main dining room to find the table impeccably set for 40. The candles are ready to be lit. The food is still warm in the kitchen. Bottles of wine are chilling on ice. For the weary, hungry, and victorious British officers, it is an irresistible prize. In one of the most symbolic acts of the entire war, the men who had just put the American army to flight sit down at the president's table. They uncork his wine, toast their victory, and proceed to eat the dinner intended for James Madison and his government. It is the ultimate humiliation, a moment of supreme, arrogant triumph. They are conquerors in the enemy's seat of power. Once the plates are empty and the bottles are drained, Admiral Cockburn looks around the fine building. The time for feasting is over. The time for vengeance has arrived. The meal is finished. The wine is gone. Major General Ross, a soldier's soldier, feels a professional reluctance. This is not a fortress. There are no military men to fight. But the orders for this expedition were clear, and Rear Admiral George Cockburn is at his side, brimming with a destructive energy. This is the moment of retribution he has long awaited. The primary targets are not private homes. Ross is strict on this point. The targets are the public symbols of the American government, the very edifices that represent the state which had declared war on Britain and, more personally for Cockburn, had burned the Parliament at York. The British troops, disciplined even in this moment of victory, are formed up outside the president's mansion. Torches are prepared. The first objective is the grandest building in the city, the Capitol building. It sits on a hill, a potent symbol of American democracy. Ross and Cockburn lead their men through the empty streets, the sound of their boots and the jangle of their equipment echoing in the silence. At approximately 10:30 p.m., the 4th, the King's Own, and 44th, East Essex regiments file into the magnificent structure. They find themselves in the opulent chambers of the House of Representatives and the Senate. The building itself is a work of art, but it is also full of flammable material. The British troops, acting with methodical efficiency, pile the fine furniture, desks and curtains in the centre of the chambers. Most fatefully, they discover the Library of Congress. Thousands of books, dry paper and parchment are added to the pyre. Cockburn, in a fit of theatrical mockery, reportedly climbs into the Speaker's chair in the House chamber and calls a mock vote. Shall this harbour of Yankee democracy be burned? All in favour say aye. The roar of ayes from the soldiers is the building's death sentence. The torches are put to the kindling. The effect is instantaneous. The dry wood, the thousands of books, the heavy drapes, they ignite with a whoosh. The fire races up the walls and consumes the wooden shingled roof. Within minutes, the entire building is an inferno. The flames leap hundreds of feet into the night sky, a spectacular, terrifying beacon of British power. The intense heat cracks the stone columns and melts the glass. From miles away, residents of Maryland and Virginia who had fled the city can see their capital's legislature transformed into a colossal torch. It is a sight of pure symbolic annihilation. From the burning Capitol, the troops march back down Pennsylvania Avenue to the president's mansion, which they had so recently feasted in. Around 11:00 p.m., the 85th Light Infantry is given the same grim task. They move from room to room, piling furniture and setting it alight. The building that had hosted the conqueror's dinner now becomes their bonfire. The flames catch quickly, engulfing the fine interiors and bursting through the windows, the black smoke mixing with the orange glow from the fire on Capitol Hill. The sky over Washington is now a flickering, hellish red. Admiral Cockburn is not finished. He has a personal score to settle. He detests the American press, particularly the National Intelligencer, a newspaper that had published numerous articles attacking him personally, labeling him a ruffian for his raids on the Chesapeake. He personally leads a detachment of Royal Marines to the newspaper's office. He orders the building destroyed, declaring it had written so many lies about him. The soldiers, with grim humour, are ordered to destroy all the letter C's from the printing press so the paper can no longer print his name. Then, they too set the building to the torch. The night wears on as the British soldiers, illuminated by the fires they have set, move to other public buildings. The Treasury Department is burned. The Washington Navy Yard, already set alight by the fleeing Americans to prevent its resources from falling into British hands, adds its own plume of smoke and the thud of exploding munitions to the chaos. Washington, D.C., the proud young capital, is being systematically erased. Dawn on August 25, 1814, breaks not with light, but with a pall of acrid smoke. Washington is a city of smouldering ruins. The Capitol building is a blackened stone shell, its internal columns cracked and fallen. The President's mansion is a gutted, roofless husk, its white sandstone walls scorched black with soot. The Treasury, the War Department, the Navy Yard, all are testament to the systematic destruction of the previous night. Major General Ross and Admiral Cockburn ride through the streets, masters of a conquered city that is little more than a graveyard of federal ambition. The British troops, still under iron discipline, have refrained from widespread private looting, but their presence is a terrifying occupation. The burning is not over. Small detachments continue the work, ensuring the destruction of the Navy Yard's rope walks and any remaining military stores. But the atmosphere is changing. The oppressive, suffocating heat of the past week is gone. A new, strange tension fills the air. The sky, which had glowed red with fire all night, is now darkening with a sickly, greenish-grey cast. The air becomes unnaturally still. The British veterans, men who have campaigned across the globe, look at the sky with a growing unease. This is not a normal summer squall. Suddenly, in the middle of the day, the heavens open. This is not a cleansing rain. It is a deluge of biblical proportions. A massive storm, described by witnesses as a derecho, or even a hurricane, that has inexplicably moved inland, smashes into the city. The wind comes first, a violent, shrieking gale that tears at the ravaged landscape. It is a wind so powerful that it rips the roofs from remaining houses, sending shingles and timbers flying like missiles. It is a wind that picks up British field cannons and spins them around on the ground. The British, exposed in the open or in their flimsy campaign tents, are now at the mercy of an element they cannot fight. Then comes the rain. It falls not in drops, but in solid horizontal sheets that extinguish the last of the great fires. The smouldering embers of the Capitol and the White House are drowned in a torrential flood. The very act of destruction that the British had so methodically prosecuted is now, just as methodically, being undone by the weather. The providential nature of the event is lost on no one. The citizens of Washington, hiding in their cellars, see it as an act of God, a divine intervention to save their city from total annihilation. For the British, it is a disaster. The storm is doing more damage to their equipment and morale than any American resistance had. General Ross, seeing the chaos, knows the gamble is over. His mission was to shock, burn, and demoralize, not to occupy. He has succeeded beyond all expectation. But now his army is exposed, their powder is at risk, and the very elements have turned against them. The storm, in its fury, has made the decision for him. It has doused the flames, ending the punitive work, and it has made the city untenable. The order is given. The army will withdraw. As the storm rages, the 4,500 redcoats, soaked to the bone, their red coatees now a dark, muddy crimson, form their columns. On the night of August 25th, under the cover of the continuing rain and darkness, the British Army begins its long 50-mile retreat from the ruined capital, marching back towards the safety of the Royal Navy's guns on the Patuxent. They had entered the city as conquerors. They leave it as ghosts, driven out not by an American army, but by the heavens themselves. As the last redcoat disappears into the stormy night, the citizens of Washington creep back into their ravaged city. On August 27th, President James Madison returns. He is a leader without a capital, a president without a home. The sight that greets him is one of complete and profound humiliation. The president's mansion is a gutted, blackened shell, its proud white sandstone walls scarred and smoked. The Capitol, the very symbol of the Republic's legislative power, is a roofless ruin, its library and chambers reduced to ashes and cracked marble. The city is a portrait of defeat, saved from total annihilation only by the freakish intervention of the storm. The psychological impact is immediate and profound. Across America, the news is met with a cry of outrage. The burning of the Capitol is seen as an act of pure vandalism, a barbaric violation of the civilized rules of warfare. The National Intelligencer, despite the destruction of its presses, will soon find a way to publish, and its cries for vengeance echo the sentiment of the nation. The British, however, feel entirely justified. To them, and to Ross and Cockburn, this was a simple tit-for-tat equation. The Americans had burned the Canadian capital of York. The British had now burned the American capital. It was retaliation, not barbarism. But this distinction is lost in the patriotic fury that begins to sweep the United States. The humiliation of the Bladensburg races and the shock of the burning capital do not, as the British had hoped, demoralize the Americans. Instead, it enrages them. It galvanizes a nation that had, until this point, been deeply divided over the war. Meanwhile, on the Patuxent River, Ross's 4,500 veterans re-embark onto the waiting Royal Navy fleet. They are exhausted, soaked and muddy, but they are victorious. They have marched 100 miles in 10 days, deep into enemy territory, defeated a force that outnumbered them, captured a capital, and returned with minimal casualties. It is a textbook military operation, a stunning example of a combined arms raid. But Admiral Cockburn and General Ross are not finished. Washington was a symbolic target, a political statement. The real prize, the strategic and economic heart of the Chesapeake, lies 50 miles to the north. From the burning ruins of the capital, the glow of the inferno had been visible in that city, the sprawling, wealthy port of Baltimore. Baltimore is the third largest city in America, a vital economic hub, and, most offensively to the Royal Navy, a nest of pirates. It is the home port for the fast, sleek American privateers that have been savaging British merchant shipping. To capture Baltimore would be to cut out the heart of the American war effort in the mid-Atlantic. The British fleet, a swarm of frigates, transports, and bomb ketchers, hoists anchor. The Royal Navy is the undisputed master of the bay, and it now turns its guns north. But the men of Baltimore have seen the smoke from Washington. They have heard the tales of the Bladensburg races. They know they are next, and they will not be running. The British fleet, a flotilla of 19 warships, bomb ketchers, and transports, sails north from the Patuxent, a vulture gliding towards its next meal. Their objective, Baltimore, is a prize far greater than the symbolic capital they just left in ruins. Baltimore is the third largest city in America, a bustling, wealthy port. More importantly, it is the home base for the sleek, fast privateers that have been bleeding British commerce dry. To the Royal Navy, this city is, quite simply, a nest of pirates, and they are bringing the full weight of their professional fury to bear. But the 50 miles between Washington and Baltimore, and the nearly 3 weeks since the Bladensburg raid, have been the city's salvation. Baltimore is not Washington. It is not a city of politicians and symbolic architecture. It is a city of merchants, sailors, and laborers, and it is not led by the feckless William Winder. The defense of Baltimore is in the hands of Major General Samuel Smith. Smith is a U.S. senator, a veteran of the Revolutionary War, and a man of immense practical energy. He has seen the orange glow in the sky from the burning capital. He has heard the humiliating stories of the Bladensburg races, and he has sworn it will not happen here. Under Smith's command, the city transforms. This is not a panic, it is a mobilization. Smith calls on every citizen, and thousands respond. Free and enslaved African Americans, merchants, artisans, and farmers all report to the eastern side of the city, on a prominence known as Hampstead Hill. There, under the direction of Commodore John Rogers, another naval man like Barney without a fleet, they dig. They work day and night, constructing a formidable 3-mile-wide line of earthworks, trenches, and artillery batteries. They build redoubts, they sharpen stakes, and they position over 100 cannons. By the time the British arrive, this eastern approach to the city will be defended by a dug-in army of over 10,000 men. This will not be a race, it will be a fortress. Simultaneously, the city's harbour, the entrance to the port itself, is being sealed. The man in command of the star-shaped bastion that guards the channel, Fort McHenry, is Major George Armistead. He has a garrison of 1,000 US Army regulars and militia. He knows his fort is the key. To make the Navy's job even harder, General Smith orders a line of American merchant ships to be scuttled, sunk in the main channel, to create an impassable underwater barrier. This, combined with the guns of Fort McHenry and the supporting batteries at Fort Covington and Lazaretto Point, makes a direct naval assault on the inner harbour impossible. The British fleet will be held at a distance, forced to pound the fort from afar. As a final act of preparation, a symbol of defiance, Major Armistead had, weeks earlier, commissioned a new flag for the fort. It is a flag of defiant, colossal proportions, 30 feet high by 42 feet wide. It is a flag designed to be seen. On September 12, 1814, the British Armada is sighted. The plan is the same as the one that worked so brilliantly at Washington, a two-pronged pincer attack. Major General Ross will land his 4,500 veterans at North Point, a peninsula 12 miles southeast of the city, and march overland. Vice Admiral Alexander Cochrane will simultaneously sail his fleet up the Patapsco River to bombard Fort McHenry and destroy the harbour defences. Ross, flush with the easy victory at Bladensburg, is supremely confident. He reportedly boasts that he doesn't care if it rains militia and that he will eat supper in Baltimore that night. But the militia he is about to meet are not the militia from Bladensburg. On the morning of September 12, 1814, the British transports begin disgorging troops onto the beaches of North Point. Major General Robert Ross lands his 4,500 veterans, the same elite force that had taken Washington. They are confident, professional, and expecting another easy victory. Ross, in particular, is dismissive of the American militia he believes is waiting for him. He has reportedly declared that the city will be his by nightfall. The march begins, with the British advancing up the narrow peninsula, a strip of land bordered by the Patapsco River and Back River. In Baltimore, General Samuel Smith has anticipated this exact move. He deploys a brigade of nearly 4,000 Maryland militia under the command of Brigadier General John Stricker. Stricker is not William Winder, and his mission is not to defeat Ross's army. That would be impossible. His mission is to fight a delaying action. He is to meet the British, engage them sharply, inflict casualties, and then fall back in good order to the main defensive line at Hampstead Hill. He is buying time for the city's main defence to be fully manned. He places his men in a strong position at Godley Wood, using the terrain, swamps, and streams to protect his flanks. He then sends a detachment of riflemen forward as skirmishers to probe the British advance. As the British column marches inland, Ross, ever the frontline commander, rides near the head of his troops. He is in high spirits, reportedly joking with his officers. But the woods here are not the open fields of Bladensburg. They are thick, and they are filled with American sharpshooters. Suddenly, a volley erupts from the trees. The American skirmishers have engaged the British vanguard. Ross, turning in his saddle to direct his reinforcements, makes himself a target. A bullet, or perhaps two, fired by a pair of young American riflemen named Daniel Wells and Henry McComas, who would themselves be killed moments later, finds its mark. The shot passes through the general's right arm and punches deep into his chest. Major General Robert Ross, the victor of Bladensburg, the man who burned the White House, slumps from his horse, mortally wounded. The death of a commander can shatter an army's morale. Ross is quickly carried to the rear, bleeding profusely. He dies on the road, en route back to the fleet, his last words a thought for his wife in Ireland. Command of the British Army on the ground immediately passes to Colonel Arthur Brooke of the 44th Regiment. Brooke is a competent officer, but he is not Ross. The Ellen and audacious spirit of the British force have died with their general. The advance, now cautious and methodical, continues. Around 3 p.m, Brooke's main force, having deployed, engages Stryker's line. The British unleash their terrifying Congreve rockets, the red glare that had panicked the militia at Bladensburg. But Stryker's men are made of sterner stuff. The Maryland 5th Regiment, in particular, holds its ground with the poise of veterans. A fierce firefight erupts. For nearly an hour, the American militia stands toe-to-toe with Wellington's veterans, exchanging volleys of musket fire. The British, with their superior discipline, begin to bring their numbers to bear. Brooke, executing a classic peninsular tactic, sends a regiment to turn the American left flank. Stryker, seeing he is about to be enveloped and having achieved his objective, gives the order to withdraw. This is no rout. It is an orderly, fighting retreat. The Americans fall back, covered by their riflemen, to the main defences at Hampstead Hill. The Battle of North Point is technically a British victory. They hold the field, but it is a hollow one. They have taken significant casualties, their commander is dead, and the American militia has proven it can stand and fight. As night falls and a heavy rain begins, Colonel Brooke halts his exhausted army. He is now within sight of Baltimore's main defences on Hampstead Hill. What he sees stops him cold. Colonel Arthur Brooke, now in command of the British land force, stands on the damp ground and stares through his spyglass at the American position on Hampstead Hill. What he sees is not a hasty line of panicked militia. It is a fortress. Stretching for 3 miles from the harbour's edge to the north is a formidable, intelligently designed system of trenches, redoubts, and earthworks. He can see the muzzles of over 100 cannons positioned to create interlocking fields of fire. And behind these defences, he can see the glint of bayonets from an army that outnumbers his own by more than 2 to 1. Over 10,000 American troops, a mix of militia and regulars, all waiting for him. This is a tactical nightmare. The men who had run at Bladensburg have dug in at Baltimore. The city's entire populace, it seems, has spent weeks building this line. Brooke, a seasoned Peninsular officer, knows a frontal assault would be a suicidal massacre. His 4,300 veterans are the best in the world, but they cannot charge fixed fortifications manned by 10,000 men with 100 cannons. The land-based pincer of the attack has stalled. Brooke's army is now just a spectator, waiting. The entire operation now depends on the other arm of the pincer, the Royal Navy. He must wait for Vice Admiral Cochrane to do what the army cannot: break the American line. Cochrane must smash Fort McHenry, sail his warships into the inner harbour, and flank the American fortress on Hampstead Hill. Until then, Brooke and his men can do nothing but listen to the sound of the battle shifting from the land to the water. At dawn on September 13th, the second phase of the attack begins. In the Patapsco River, 19 British warships have moved into position. The fleet includes powerful frigates, but the real work will be done by the specialised assault vessels, the bomb ketches. Ships like the Terror and Erebus are floating mortar platforms designed to hurl 10-inch, 200-pound explosive shells in a high arc. With them is the rocket ship Meteor, which can unleash salvos of Congreve rockets. They anchor just out of range of Fort McHenry's primary cannons. In command of the fort is Major George Armistead with his 1,000 men. They are protected by the star-shaped bastion, the sunken merchant ships clogging the channel, and their own heavy 42-pounder guns. Watching this all from a helpless position is a young American lawyer named Francis Scott Key. He is on a British truce ship, having successfully negotiated the release of an American prisoner. But Admiral Cochrane, not wanting Key to reveal the British plan of attack, has detained him. Key is now a prisoner, forced to watch as the might of the Royal Navy attempts to pulverise his countrymen. At approximately 7 a.m, Admiral Cochrane gives the order. The bombardment begins. The sound is a continuous deafening thunder that rolls across the water and echoes for miles. The British bomb catchers open fire, their mortars lobbing shell after shell into the sky. The explosives, with their burning fuses, trace a lazy high arc before falling into the fort. The meteor adds its contribution, the terrifying screaming Congreve rockets, the red glare, streaking across the water. For 25 hours, this relentless pounding continues. Major Armistead's men can do little but hunker down behind the thick earth and brick walls. Their own guns, for the most part, cannot reach the main British bombardment fleet. It is a one-sided, agonizing artillery duel. The British are attempting to reduce the fort to rubble, to break the will of the men inside, and to blast a path for their frigates into the harbour. All through the day and into the night, the sky is filled with the bombs bursting in air, a spectacle of fire and destruction. Colonel Brooke, on land, listens to the unending barrage. Every explosion is a signal of hope. He waits for the guns of Fort McHenry to fall silent. The night of September 13th is a nightmare of noise and fire. The British bombardment of Fort McHenry is relentless. Major George Armistead and his 1,000 men are trapped in a star-shaped inferno. An estimated 1,500 to 1,800 mortar shells and rockets rain down upon them. The ground shudders with each impact. The air is thick with the smell of sulphur and gunpowder. During the long bombardment, the fort's defenders fly a smaller storm flag, as the massive garrison flag would be torn to shreds by the concussive force of the shells. The damage to the fort, however, is surprisingly light. The earth and brick ramparts absorb the explosions, and the men remain hunkered down, enduring the storm of iron. Admiral Cochrane, frustrated that his mortars are not silencing the fort, grows desperate. He knows Colonel Brooke is waiting for a breakthrough. Around midnight, Cochrane authorizes a high-risk flanking maneuver. He dispatches a force of Marines in small boats, under the cover of darkness and the continuing bombardment, to slip past the fort, up the ferry branch of the river. Their goal is to get behind the American lines, outflank Fort McHenry, and perhaps create a diversion that will allow Brooke to finally assault Hampstead Hill. But the Americans are not sleeping. As the British boats, rowing muffled oars, try to navigate the unfamiliar channel, they are spotted. The American shore batteries at Fort Covington and Babcock, silent until now, erupt in a sheet of flame. The American gunners pour grape shot and canister into the water, smashing the British boats. The flanking mission turns into a panicked, bloody retreat. The Royal Navy is repulsed, driven back by the very shore batteries they had been unable to see or silence. The failure is total. The British naval pincer is broken. Admiral Cochrane has fired thousands of shells, and the fort still stands. The harbour is still sealed. He cannot get his frigates in range to support Colonel Brooke. On land, Brooke receives the news. He looks again at the 10,000 men waiting for him behind their fortress of mud and logs. His orders were not to attack unless he was certain of success. Without naval support, a land assault would be a massacre, a fool's errand. The gamble is lost. The British have been beaten. As the first hints of dawn grey the sky on September 14th, Colonel Brooke gives the order for the land army to begin its withdrawal. The bombardment from the water continues through the night, but its fury lessens. Then, at 7 a.m., it stops. The silence is sudden, profound, and terrifying. On the British truce ship, Francis Scott Key has spent the night pacing the deck, watching the bombs bursting in air and the rockets' red glare. He has no way of knowing the outcome. In the pre-dawn mist and smoke, the fort is invisible. The silence could mean one of two things. The British have given up, or the fort has surrendered. As the sun begins to rise, Key, John Skinner, and the captured American doctor stare intently at the spot where the fort should be. The smoke and mist begin to clear. Through the dawn's early light, they see a flag. It is not the Union Jack. It is the American flag. And it is not the small, tattered storm flag. In a final, magnificent act of defiance, Major Armistead's men have lowered the storm flag, fired their morning gun, and hoisted the massive 30 by 42-foot garrison flag. The star-spangled banner unfurls, a colossal symbol of resilience, visible to the entire city and the retreating British fleet. For Key, The sight is so moving that he begins to jot down the lines of a poem on the back of a letter. The great flag over Fort McHenry is a signal of victory for the Americans. For the British, it is a final, defiant punctuation mark on a disastrous failure. Colonel Arthur Brooke, his army already in retreat, marches his 4,300 veterans back to North Point. They are a professional force, undefeated in the open field, yet they have been turned back by a line of trenches and the sheer stubbornness of a citizen army. They re-embark onto the Royal Navy transports, their mood a stark contrast to the triumphant arrogance they felt after Washington. The death of Major General Robert Ross has cast a pall over the entire force. The charismatic leader who had led them to the enemy's capital is now a body preserved in a barrel of rum, bound for Halifax. The army's audacious land campaign is over. Admiral Cochrane's fleet, having fired over 1,500 shells to no effect, has no other option. The harbour is impenetrable. The army is beaten. He orders the fleet to weigh anchor. The 19 ships, including the bomb ketches, Terror and Erebus, turn and sail south, down the Patapsco, and out of the Chesapeake. They leave behind a city that is not burning, but celebrating. The audacious gamble was a two-part operation. The first, the raid on Washington, was a brilliant, shocking success that humiliated a nation. The second, the strike on Baltimore, was a costly and absolute failure that helped to save it. This twin campaign, a stunning victory followed by a decisive defeat, would have implications far beyond the Chesapeake. At the same time, in the cold north, another major British invasion down Lake Champlain had been decisively repulsed at the Battle of Plattsburgh. The news of these two failures, at Baltimore and Plattsburgh, would reach the peace negotiators in Ghent, Belgium. The British, who had hoped to dictate terms to a defeated America, now found their position severely weakened. The shock and awe strategy had failed. The burning of Washington, intended to demoralize the Americans and break their will to fight, had done the exact opposite. It was seen as an act of senseless vandalism, a barbaric attack on symbols, and it had enraged the population. It galvanized a fractured, war-weary country with a new, unified sense of purpose. In the end, the most enduring legacies of the Chesapeake campaign were symbolic. The British had burned the public buildings of Washington, but the Republic endured. From the ashes, a new capital would rise. The President's mansion, its sandstone walls scorched black by the flames, would be repainted a brilliant white, and in the process, gain its new, iconic name, the White House. The Library of Congress, reduced to ash, would be refounded by the purchase of Thomas Jefferson's personal collection. The city and the nation had been tested by fire and survived. But perhaps the most powerful legacy came from the mind of the young lawyer trapped on the British truce ship. Francis Scott Key's poem, Defense of Fort McHenry, was published in Baltimore newspapers within days. It was set to the tune of a popular English song and spread across the nation with the speed of a rumor. It was a song that captured not just the defiance of a single fort, but the entire improbable story of the nation's survival. The rockets' red glare and bombs bursting in air were no longer just the sounds of a battle. They were the terrifying fiery birth pains of a new national identity. The flag he saw in the dawn's early light became more than a piece of cloth. It became the star-spangled banner, a permanent symbol of resilience. The 4,500 redcoats who had gambled so audaciously had succeeded in burning a capital, but they had failed to break a nation. In their victory and their defeat, they had inadvertently given their enemy the one thing it had lacked most, a legend. Thanks for watching. If you found this story fascinating, please hit the like button, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts in the comments. We'll see you in the next video.